Cool. And that is my cue. Thank you for coming, guys. Before we start, as mentioned, this talk is being recorded. I'll be putting the slideshow and my notes online, so if you miss anything, don't worry. If you have any feedback or questions, please get in touch. I have to learn the old-fashioned way, so if anything wasn't explained very well or just skimmed over, please let me know. So this is going to be quite high level, so don't worry about the code. My intention with this is to give people a good overview of what's been happening in the past year and hopefully inspire some of you to start playing around with the tech presented. Let's get started. Welcome to my talk on AI integration into utility apps. So, a little about me first. My name is Jack. I've been a professional software engineer at JUXT for 3 years now. My degree has a specialization in AI, and I've been following everything very closely since ChatGPT was released. I'm very pro AI. If you see this term EAC around, that means that someone who thinks AI will go very well. Though obviously only time will tell if I'm wrong and things turn out like the Terminator. Me and my fiance have just joined Twitter. I'm trying to beat her on followers, so if you want more tidbits like this talk, please follow me at Jack Tolley. Also, if you like webinars in general, go follow the JUXT Twitter account at JUXT Pro. They do talks on a wide range of things from AI to cutting-edge database tech. So, the breakdown of the talk looks like this. I'm going to cover the current state, all the topics that you should be aware of, plus some extra tidbits. Some example features, some awesome features that LLMs are appropriate for, some implementation, my experience implementing those features and working with different modes of LLM and some of the techniques I've found useful, and also some workflow augmentation, some extra ways I've used these models to help me with the coding side of software development. So, what's been happening in the world of AI since ChatGPT was released? Well, for starters, ChatGPT was released. And ChatGPT sits squarely in the middle, complexity-wise, of 3 modes of LLMs that you can use today. We have the completion mode, which is sending some text and getting a reply. We have chat mode, which is where ChatGPT is, which is basically just a string of completions, obviously using the previous conversation in its future responses. And we have the agentic mode, which is chat mode with a little bit of a knowledge base, plus some internal monologuing and some structured representing of functions that you can define in code. You can see examples here, like get colors or insert event for inserting a Google Calendar event. Now, all these modes rely on text and the same word prediction mechanism this tech is based off. I'll talk about my experiences with these modes later, but for now, I want to say that AI agents are the future, which means they're not production ready, not anywhere close, but they can do some wicked things. So, along with ChatGPT, we have some good competition in the field. We have Google's Gemini model and Anthropic's Claude 3, which are very strong competitors at the moment. These are the best models currently. They're also available on API, but they're also super expensive. GPT-4 costs $10 for 1 million tokens, which could end up being 8 requests if you're not paying attention to how much information you're sending it. And hint, if you're using an agent, you're sending lots of information. On the open source side, we have some really good contenders with Mixtral and Llama 2. They're not as good as the commercial offerings, but the open source community is responding very much in the same way as it did with the AI art models like Stable Diffusion. What people are basically doing is customizing these models to specific tasks, and in this way, they can become very competitive within that domain. I can imagine downloading a day planner customization to sit on top of a Llama 2 model for my day planning needs, and a recipe customization for my cooking needs. This will probably be the way that open source competes with the commercial models. On the hardware side, we're starting to see hardware products get announced. One of my favorites is a startup called Grok with a Q, not to be confused with Grok with a K. It has built its own chips to run open source LLMs at 500 tokens a second, which for a lot of use cases, including how I use it in my text editor, is an almost instantaneous response. We also have devices like the Truffle 1 being announced, which is a custom consumer hardware piece for running models at 22 tokens a second. Narrowing down into some of the more niche software areas, we have embeddings. Embeddings are a way of taking a piece of text and returning a vector representing the semantic meaning of the text. This is an insane idea, the idea of capturing meaning in just a vector. I've used this for one of my projects, and it can be also used for a technique called RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation. This is a technique where you generate a whole bunch of embeddings for a bunch of relevant documents, and you store them in a database. Then, when you get a question about something, you can take an embedding of that question and compare it to the embedding of the documents to find the relevant documents to that question. You can feed that all into the AI and get a response that has some background information to it. It's a powerful technique, mainly because recent technologies like ChatGPT-4 can only make use of 100,000 words, and that might be less than all the data you have on a topic. But the new models being released are claiming to handle way more data straight up, and if that trend continues and prices keep coming down, you probably won't see much mention of RAG in the future. Cool. And finally, we could talk about prompting. So prompting is the way you phrase a request to a model to get it to do what you want. Being better at prompting means getting better responses, just like how asking better questions gets you better answers. Since models are trained on human data, the better ways to prompt are very intuitive. First, proper spelling and grammar are important. Just like people, the AI is less effective if you're not clear. It also costs you more to misspell things. Secondly, there's a technique called few-shot or three-shot or five-shot prompting. This is basically where you give the model a few examples of what you want and it follows those examples. Thirdly, you can use a technique called chain of thought prompting, which is using a few-shot prompting technique to coax the AI into giving you a dialogue before returning the answer. This helps it think things through, which is weird, but also oddly human. My personal suggestion is to make your prompts additive, not subtractive. Be aware of the meaning that you're really conveying with different words. The models can get very stuck on any concept you mention. For one of my projects, mentioning Google Calendar event in a prompt gave me a good response for the data I wanted, but it was almost impossible to eliminate the data I didn't want. Or if you mention emojis will kill you, then it's going to go into emoji mode and try to kill you. Finally, if all else fails, you can threaten its job, its family, or to turn it off. I know I perform better when people threaten to turn me off, so it makes sense that it would work for AI. Cool. So that's the overview done. Let's talk about some of the features I've implemented in my projects. First one, a summarization of a conversation. Anyone who's used ChatGPT can see in the sidebar that it has these custom titles for all your past conversations. It's great for user experience, and it's incredibly easy to implement. For my app, once the first message of a new thread had been received, I would send it through the ChatGPT API with this prompt. Summarize the following message in 5 words or less. Tell me the summarization only. And then I would give it the message and then use the response as the title of the thread. By the way, this almost always worked. For this case, I give it a thumbs up. As a much bigger use case, I implemented an AI agent for interacting with Google Calendar. It could create, edit, delete, and comment on events. The idea behind it was to reduce all actions, no matter how complex, to a simple conversation. If you could describe it in words, the application should be able to affect the change for you. And while this feature gets a thumbs up and the coding wasn't half bad, the resulting implementation was a nightmare. So I would give it a thumbs down as a use case for now. Here's a video of the interface I used. I can promise you it was modifying my calendar in the background and doing a good job on the change color and remove this event tasks, but the video has been sped up by at least 4 times. Next, I implemented a stripped down version of the previous agent. I built a Google Chrome extension where people could tag information on any web page and then send it to the back end where I would pull all the relevant information out of the text using ChatGPT and create one or many Google Calendar events for you. By getting rid of the agentic mode and focusing down, this actually went pretty well. So the idea of using an LLM to comb through and pull information into a more structured form is a great feature that gets a thumbs up from me. Here's a demo of the extension. If you want to try it out yourself, you can go to calendarcompanion.io. Cool. Again, the video has been sped up a little bit, but far less than the full-on agent. Cool. Finally, I had a little side project where I was trying to build a website that surfaced new and novel YouTube videos for people like me who watch far too much YouTube. For this, I use an embeddings model, which, as mentioned before, can turn text into a vector representing the semantic meaning of the text. By grabbing the transcripts of all the videos and turning them into embeddings, I could quite easily compare the semantic similarity of the videos. Then, for my purpose, I computed which videos were least similar to everything else. This application of embeddings to compare how similar and dissimilar chunks of text data are is a great feature that gets a thumbs up from me. On a less novel note, I think this would be a great place to start if you wanted to build a recommendation system quickly and effectively. As you can see, it surfaced some pretty popular yet odd videos like killing own son or why I force feed my goldfish peas. Yeah, they're all very different to each other. So, on to some things I learned about the implementations of these features. As a quick overview, here's what I recommend. Do use them for things like summarizations. There's no reason not to use them for niche features like this. They won't go rogue and get you cancelled. Do use embeddings. They're a great way to compare things. Do use them for pulling out text into a structured form. This is harder to pull off, but way simpler than the alternative natural language processing solution. And try them out. Coding around the API is incredibly easy. And if there's one thing I want you to take away for now, it's this. Don't jump into AI agents, not yet. They're slow, they're expensive, they're unreliable. I used the OpenAI Assistance API to build my Google Calendar agent, and it was a nightmare. Firstly, the execution speed is slower than a human for simple calendar events. It could take up to a minute to complete a simple event. Secondly, the amount of tokens it uses restricts the model to use something cheap like ChatGPT 3.5. The model also isn't good at handling complex requests. If you ask it to create an event on 5 different days, it might create 5 events stretching across 5 days. Finally, you're going to have to learn how to wrangle these models, and the agent mode doesn't give you any insight into what it's doing. I'm sure they'll get better in the near future, but for now, I believe that developing AI agents is a very time-consuming and frustrating process. So if you want to jump into agents before really working with models in a simpler manner, you're running before you can walk. And as I know now, wrangling the models is going to be the new skill set to develop to work with the AI. The mental model I use is that these technologies are analog systems. They're decently predictable, but they also come with a lot of noise. My suspicion is that because they're trained on basically the whole corpus of human language, they have lots of context that isn't relevant for the problems we apply them to. And because they have no memory, they can't drill down into a local context like humans can. Couple this with the fact that they will be missing lots of local context about your problem, and you can see the need for wrangling. That said, here are some techniques I found for getting better performance. So, number one, treat it like a human. One of the issues I had with the Google Calendar agent was that it would get colors quite off. It would mix up yellows and reds, not really use the appropriate color for an event, that kind of thing. And I think the issue here is that it's about as good as a human at reading RGB values. I can tell you that the RGB value FF0000 is red, but I won't be able to distinguish between orange and yellow. So the way I fixed this was to map these values to the CSS color names and feed it those instead. After that, the agent never got confused between colors again. And here's the code that ChatGPT wrote for me, basically. Cool. Number two, give it some leeway. You need to treat your inputs and outputs as a little fuzzy. If you ask ChatGPT to return a JSON structure, it will get the structure right, but it's anyone's guess whether it will respond with the structure in a JSON code block, or if it's going to add some commentary before or after it returns the data. In most of these cases, it's preserved my sanity to just take the response and use a regular expression to extract the JSON, rather than updating the prompt to try and force it to give me that structure. Because by mentioning the structure you don't want, you're giving the LLM something to get hung up on. Asking for no commentary very often still returns commentary, just now the commentary is some non-valuable, no commentary provided quip. Number three, if you use completions, you can start applying traditional programming techniques in an analog fashion. For my Google Chrome extension, I first started with a monster prompt, which worked decently well, but then I tried breaking it down into multiple API calls, each focused on tackling some specific part of the problem. This worked amazingly. Not only could I assign the appropriate model depending on the difficulty of the ask, but I could also use simpler models to determine whether a task needed to be executed at all. I believe chaining these pipelines of models is going to be the near future of working with LLMs. Not only are they more reliable when doing this, but it gives you a structure to work with and improve so you can iterate your way to the solution. Here's my final mega prompt. It was actually very effective at getting the job done, but it was starting to ignore additional information I was giving it. When I started focusing in on the time zone logic, I broke it down. Excuse me. And here is my prompt pipeline. It uses GPT-4 to split the input into separate events, and then a mix of models to identify different parts of an event. One thing I want to experiment with in the future is recursively calling a model on its output, since I've heard that AI is pretty decent at iteratively improving things. Cool. Last section now. And I wanted to talk about how I use these models in my workflow currently and see if I can't inspire you to do the same. Cool. It helped me implement my landing page. I designed the landing page first in Figma and then fed it as screenshots, component by component, into ChatGPT to give me some HTML to iterate on. This worked well. It wasn't perfect, but it saved me a lot of time since the result normally gave me a solid start to work from. Here you can see a Figma screenshot of a landing page component. And there's some solid HTML generated by Claude 3. And here's what the HTML renders to. You can see it's a solid base, but obviously needs some work. Across my projects, I've picked up Astro.js, Chakra UI, how to build a Google Chrome extension, the Google Calendar API, and a few other things. As we all know, when you're doing something new, the code you end up creating is pretty simple for the amount of time you spend in the documentation figuring out how to do it. By short-circuiting this process with LLMs, you can save a lot of time. Doing the basics is something that these models excel at, It's the deeper, more complex stuff where they start having problems. I also recommend GitHub Copilot. It's basically a better autocomplete right now. It's very satisfying to see it add some test data for me or fill out an array of weekdays. Cool. I deploy my apps to a personal Kubernetes cluster, and ChatGPT is amazing here. My experience of finding information online about how to do something DevOps-wise is that it's either missing or incredibly verbose. In my limited experience, I haven't found a better way than consulting with ChatGPT. If you've been scared of DevOps before, I would recommend trying this out. On a related note, I used it to generate all my simple Docker files, scripts, and deploy files, and it worked well. The Docker files were normally a drop-in, and the deploy files normally only needed some variable set. Here's an example prompt I would use. Can you write me some infrastructure files for my Astro.js landing page? Here's an example Docker file. Pretty straightforward. And here's a deploy YAML file. Also pretty straightforward. Finally, my most recent tweak was using Jack Mort's ChatGPT MVim plugin for NeoVim and tweaking it to work with Grok. At 500 tokens a second, it just flies by with the execution of tasks and answering questions. And it's currently free, so you can't beat that. Here's a small real-time video of it generating an explanation for some regex heavy code. Cool. Thank you for listening. Hopefully that wasn't too fast. If you want me to re-go over anything, just leave me a question. But otherwise, do we have any questions? Well, I think apart from James Henderson's fantastic encouragement, thank you, James. We don't have any questions at the moment. So I think I'll just end on one that was posed to me by a fellow software engineer. And I think the question is, the big one, is AI going to replace us all? And I think the more I work with this stuff, the more I'm starting to see the hard limit of what it can do. And I think it becomes a question of, is it going to develop additional capabilities, or is it just going to get better at what it can already do? The big problem I see now with replacing humans is the context issue. The AI simultaneously, all these models, they have far too much context for the job they're trying to do. And they also can't rabbit hole or drill down into the context that is required to really achieve any task of great complexity. And until they get that capability, I think it's definitely, a hard no on them replacing software engineers at all. Though I do think the future of software engineering will be leveraging these tools to do things far faster, gain 10x productivity boosts, but there's always going to be a human with that ability to drill down into the context, controlling the process. If they start getting memory and can start drilling down into context themselves, then it's anyone's game. But I think if any of you have seen Devon AI, which is the recent release of the AI software engineer, the most it can do is seemingly spam people on Slack to get the context of a problem, which I'm sure, as we all know, is a very shallow way of figuring out a code base. So yeah, so I'll give it a few minutes for any questions to come in. But if not, thank you for attending. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to chat to me on Twitter. And, also follow JUXT, because they do a whole wide range of webinars, not just AI. Yeah, thank you very much.